All right, hi, I'm Sanjay Joshi. Some of you may know me. I've been in this hobby for a long time, almost 20, 25 years now. Here visiting Richard, and he sat me down in front of this tank and wants me to give you guys some tips on keeping reefs. So one of the tips that I always tell people who are especially starting out in the hobby, that learn to be patient. Nothing good ever happens quickly in this hobby, right? So most of the people when they first start, they rush things. They want things to look like a mature tank within a few weeks of setting it up. Well, that doesn't happen. Anytime you see a beautiful mature tank, you have to realize that it's several years old, and there is a lot of time and effort being put into it. So not things grow slowly. Learn to be patient. That would be my very, very first and most favorite tip I like to give people. This is not a hobby for the impatient people, even though I'm one of them. I've learned over the years through the hobby to become more patient. One of the mistakes that I made, like everybody else who gets into the hobby, and you always end up buying cheap equipment in the beginning because you don't want to spend a lot of money. And in the long term, I've found that the cheap equipment gives you more hassles than if you would have bought quality equipment to begin with. Now, quality equipment doesn't mean expensive equipment, right? So buying equipment that has history of not failing, so those kind of things. A lot of times you end up buying some cheap product and you find that that has led to the cause of your tank crash or having some issues, especially when you're traveling and things like that. First thing with any of these things, with making it bulletproof, is determining what are the things that can go wrong, right? Figuring out which ones are critical. So for example, if I have 4 lights in my tank and one of the light dies, it's not such a big deal, right? I can go for several days without that light and the tank would still be okay, right? But if all 4 of them die, then maybe I can only go 2 or 3 days before I have a problem with it, right? So the idea is to know how long something can live or last in the event of a failure. Okay? In my tank, for example, let's say my return pump dies, right? I have so much circulation inside the tank that the return pump dying is not going to lead to any catastrophic issues at all. Yeah, it all depends on how fast you can get your hands on a piece of equipment, right? So for example, where I live, there's no stores to go and buy stuff if I need it right away, right? So I have to mail order things. That means it's going to at least take me 2 to 3 days before I can get anything delivered. So situations like these, I like to keep spares of all the important components of my tank, right? I know certain things that my tank cannot run without. I know it can be without a skimmer for 2-3 days, and that's not a big problem. I can go without a skimmer for a week, it won't be a problem, right? But I can't go without, let's say my return pump dies, right? And I have my heater in the sump, right? I have other filtration equipment in the sump. All of that would come to a standstill, right, if my return pump dies. So figuring out which parts of your system your tank can live without and for how many days, right? You can use that information then to decide whether you can keep the spares or whether you should actually, you have enough time to find a replacement for it. Having redundancy is good, right? So if one piece of the equipment fails, then the second one can kick in. And this is really good for float valves. Oftentimes you'll find float valves will get stuck and you're adding RODI water to your system. Your valve is stuck and you keep adding RODI water. That's an easy way to kill a tank, right? So instead of using one float valve, you recommend using 2. Right? So knowing what things can go wrong, knowing the impact, which ones are critical, right? That can help you get to a more robust reef. So like right now, for example, I mean, I'm traveling. I'm here in Miami for 10 days. My tank is running on autopilot. I'm going to knock on wood here, right? It's running on autopilot. Every day in the morning, I get a message from my controller that lets me know that I'm communicating with it. I can log in and check my temperature and everything else and make sure things are okay. It sends alarms if anything goes out of bounds. Right? So those are things that you put in place to at least monitor the tank while you're away. I have a camera I use that I can log in again and take a look at my tank if I have to. Right? But yet, all of those things can fail. Let's say I have a power failure and now I no longer have internet access to my tank. Right? So now all of a sudden there's no easy way of communicating with the tank. And this is where having good neighbors or having a friend, right, comes in handy. Because you need eyes on the ground to go and do stuff, right? You need somebody to be able to go there and make sure that things are okay. So that's my last backup plan, is I always have somebody on alert call that I can actually call and say, hey, you know what? Can't communicate, I can't get information here. Just make sure you kind of go in and check. Right? And if they can reboot my system and all, that's really good. I use my controller mostly for monitoring purposes. Right? So it's tracking my pH, it's tracking temperature, right? And then I have ranges set up, so if it goes above or below a certain range, it sends me a message. And then I decide what I want it to do, right? So I can then use my phone to turn on things or turn off things. Okay. So the first thing is to be able to get feedback, and second thing is being able to execute an action, right, based on that feedback. I don't like to completely automate the action part of it. I like to kind of be in control. So I take the actions manually myself. But of course they're activated through the controller. Right? So I send the message to the controller to maybe turn off a light or turn off a switch, right? Or turn on something once I get the information from the controllers. I think the other important thing would be stability is more important in a tank than where it is stable, right? So people get really worked up because the pH is not 8.2 or 8.3, for example, right? That's not as important as the stability of your tank. So if its tank is happy and corals are growing at 7.8, that's perfectly fine, you know? No need to be tweaking every parameter to read like what the books say, right? Same thing with temperature. Same thing with the calcium alkalinity values. It's very important to keep them stable. They're fine within a big range, but if you're keeping them where they're moving up and down very rapidly, then that's usually never good for an aquarium. The balance, you can look at balance in a lot of different ways, right? I mean, I think there's three things that need to somehow balance in an aquarium. One of them is the nutrient levels. The other one is the light. The light and the nutrient balance plays a fairly important role, because I find a lot of times people will tell me that the corals are bleaching, and it's usually sometimes the light is too strong because they have low nutrients, right? So they'll tell me, I'm using the same lighting that you're using, I have the same settings that you're using, but my corals are bleaching, right? And it's usually because the nutrients are too low. So generally, if you have corals that are bleaching, chances are that your light and nutrient levels are not properly balanced. So if you have high nutrients, you can get away with high light. But if you have low nutrients in your tank, and if you have very high light, then you will end up with corals looking pale and looking bleached. Right? So at that point in time, you're better off maybe reducing the light levels or feeding the tank more to bring up the nutrient levels. In my tanks at home, they don't run at low nutrients by any standards. Right? My nitrates will be at 30, 40 parts per million. Phosphates will be like at 1.8, so way above what normal people have. But yet, I don't have algae growing in my tank. I don't have issues with the tank because it's a balance with the nutrients, with the light, and the alkalinity. So this is Sanjay Joshi. Thanks, Richard, for having me over to your house, taking a look at your beautiful tank, and enjoyed talking with you. Thank you, Nancy. That's why I say you have to ask me specific questions.
Right.
It's easier for me to answer a specific question.